Living our lives for Christ requires faith and obedience. Trusting in God includes trusting Him with all that we have. God has given so much to us that it is only natural that we should give back to Him. Giving our first fruits to God is a way of thanking Him for all He has done for us. Our tithes and offerings show God that He takes priority in our lives. And when we give back to God, we will start to live for a change.
Well, school, I do this all the time. When am I ever going to get this thing down? School is back. Aren't you so excited? School's back. Come on, you're with your friends. It's going to be good. A test is coming. Hey, football's coming. Okay. All right. And, of course, my love is baseball. I love football too, but baseball's better, and in my opinion. And, well, you know, my team is the Texas Rangers. But my second team is the Houston Astros. Come on. I mean, I'm right here. I know where I live. And the Astros, man, they're coming back. They're coming back. They're going to make the playoffs. I told you that months ago. They're going to make the playoffs. It's good. Hey, if you would have had $1,000 and invested $1,000 in Apple when Apple became public, $1,000, it would now be worth $314,000. Yes. And to make you feel even worse, if you would have invested $10,000, even if you had to borrow the $10,000, which is not a good idea on investments, but even if you did, it would be worth $3.1 million today. And that's called a retirement program. If you'd have invested $1,000 in Webvan when it came out. Webvan, by the way, is an online grocery store, and you can go on and you can buy everything you buy in a grocery store right online. Just buy it all, and they bring it right to your door. And if you would have invested $1,000 when they became public in Webvan, today it'd be worth approximately $0 because they went bankrupt. And there it is with investments. That's what happens with investments. You don't ever know. You don't know which way it's going. You're a little nervous. Will it actually make, or will I lose all my money? And then we see all the ads. We hear the commercials, TV, radio. We see the written ads. Oh, man, this is the one right here. You invest your money in this one, you are going to make so much money. But then there's always the disclaimer that the past successes won't necessarily translate into the future successes. There's always the disclaimer. And the disclaimer always means what we just told you won't necessarily be true for you. But the Bible talks about an investment program, and God's in charge of it, and it'll always come through. And I want to talk to you about this investment program today. We're in a series going through what is called Live for a Change, CHANGE, with each one of these letters representing one of the things that God is wanting us to principles God is wanting us to use in growing our life spiritually, becoming more like Christ. And so, as we're going through this series, and we've reached next to the last one in the series, we've been learning different principles of spiritual maturity and spiritual growth. Going down CHANGE. For instance, C represents commit to God and His family. H helps others know God. A, it is actively building, I don't have it exactly right, but actively building spiritual disciplines in our life. the end is nurturing authentic relationships. And we talked about that last week. And this morning, I want us to talk about the G of change, gives back to God. The Bible talks about an investment of our lives to not just the here and now, but in that which is to come. Jesus said, don't lay up for yourself treasures here on earth where moth and rust does corrupt and thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust does not corrupt and thieves do not break through and steal. Because where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now, I'm not an investment guy, I'm not a finance guy, but I am a Bible guy, and I want us to take a look at what the Bible teaches about the whole idea of giving back to God and the investment of our lives in doing so. But before we do, I want to dispel a myth at the very beginning. And the myth is simply this: if I had more money, I would be more generous to God. I would give more, I would be more generous in my giving to Him. I just don't have enough money to do it, but if I had more money, I would be more generous. And it makes sense. I mean, the whole thought of it just makes total sense. The problem is it just doesn't play out that way. Let me show you this cell. This is the economic breakdown in the demographics of the country. You probably would check one of these areas on a national survey. There are families that make $25,000 or less, families that make $25,000 to $50,000 as a household, $50,000 to $75,000, all the way up to those families that make $200,000 plus. And the idea is, God, if you had moved me from my category to the next category, I would be so much more generous to you. But here's how it actually plays out nationally in the United States. Those households that have $25,000 of income or less actually give 7.7% of their income nationally. Give 7.7%. Those 25 to 50,000 actually give 4.8%. This is nationally. It's not just Christians. It's everybody. 50 to 75,000, 3.5%, all the way down to the $200,000 plus. Boy, God, if you gave me that, look out what I would give to you. 2.8%. What happens? I got to tell you, the more we have, the more we want. The more stuff we buy, and the more stuff we buy, the more stuff we still want. And there's never an end to that. And what actually plays out is that our giving back to God and our generosity has nothing to do with our income. You've just seen it. Giving back to God has nothing to do with our income. Giving back to God has to do with our faith and our obedience, no matter where our income is. And I want to talk to you about that very thing today. The Bible talks about, gives us many stories that helps us to better understand God. And God uses those true stories from the Bible to show us how it is that He works in our lives. And I want to share with you one of those stories that comes from His Word to us about this very issue. The story is in the life of a man named Elijah. There are two guys that sort of fit together. When you think of Elijah, you think of Elisha. Elijah's the mentor, Elisha's the disciple. But God uses both of these guys in such an amazing, powerful way. There are so many miracles that happen in the lives of these two guys combined, more than all the other prophets in the Bible combined in times 2 or 3. We get this idea when we're reading the Bible that all through the Bible, every age, there were just tons and tons of public miracles. It was just like crazy. So where are all those miracles now? But in actuality in the Bible, what happened is that there were two great periods of time for the miracles in the Bible. There was the time of Moses and the time of Elijah and Elisha. All the other times, it was sort of like how you and I are living today, where God's at work in our lives individually. But as far as those big public miracles that are happening, it's not what we're reading in the time of Moses and the time of Elijah and Elisha. Why is it that God decided in those periods of time and then the time of Christ and time of the church to pour out His Spirit in a very unique way? I don't know. God used those moments in some special, unique way. But God in our lives, just like in the other times in the Bible, would speak and work in our lives individually, touching us, meeting our need, bringing a miracle to our life as we need it. So there is Elijah and Elisha. And notice what happens in this story in 1 Kings chapter 17. Go at once, he says to Elijah. This is God speaking to Elijah. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I've commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath, and he came to the town gate, and there was a widow who was gathering sticks. And he called to her and asked her, would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have something to drink? And as she was going to get it, now stop for just a moment. Here is Elijah asking a total stranger, this woman, who apparently somehow he knew she was a widow and she was right outside of the gate. Would you go get me some water? And she goes and gets him water. And I'm thinking to myself, knowing what's going on in this woman's life and knowing she was on the verge, she's going to die just not that much, at least she thought in her mind she was going to die in just a couple of days. She could have said, I got all kinds of troubles and problems, buddy. I don't need to go get you water. You go get your own water. But that's not what she says. What a nice woman she is. And Elijah's not trying to run her all over the place doing stuff for him. He does not know who the woman is that's going to be helping him. He just knows she's a widow woman in Zarephath. He gets to Zarephath, and here is a widow, but is this the person, or is there someone inside the city I've not met? I don't know. And so what he is doing is actually testing her. Would you go get me some water? And she says, yeah, she's on her way. And while she's on her way, he then calls to her and says, oh, and with the water, would you please bring a piece of bread? And here's her reply. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replies, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks together to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we might eat and then die. We're out of food, with no hope of food. We got one last meal left, and it's not going to be much, and we're going to eat it and then starve to death. And as soon as she said those words, he knew she was the person. And he says to her, don't you be afraid, verse 13. You go home and do what you said, but first make me a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day that the Lord gives rain on the earth. Now look, this is what's going on. There is a great famine that is in all of that land. It's the land of Israel and this land north of Israel. There is a great famine. There's a great famine because there's a great drought. There's a great drought because the people of God have turned their back on God, and God has tried everything you can imagine to get their attention. Nothing's worked, and so now he says, I'm going to get your attention this way. And by the way, this works. And so now everybody's running out of supplies. Everyone is running out of food. And God says to Elijah, I want you to leave Israel. Zarephath's not in Israel. It is in Tyre, Sidon area. I want you to leave, and I want you to go to Zarephath. These aren't Jewish people. These are Gentile people. And I want you to go to a particular woman in Zarephath. She is not a Jewish person. She is a Gentile person. But this woman knows how to trust God. And I want you to go to this woman, and she's going to take care of you. And by the way, you'll end up taking care of her. And when he says, would you bring me some food? She says, I don't have any food. I don't have any bread. I got enough flour and enough oil to cook the flour for one more meal, and then we will all starve to death. We don't understand starve to death in Sugar Land, do we? We don't understand starve to death. Look around you. Does anybody look like they're starving to death? Do I look like I'm starving to death? And do not answer that publicly. Do we look like we don't understand starve to death? But there are people in our region that are in need. And God has called His people in the Old Testament, His people in the New Testament, us. He has called every one of us that have followed Him, that part of our responsibility is to take care of people in need. Maybe there are people that are in need that you and I encounter, and we know they're hurting and struggling, and it's our job to help them and not turn a blind eye to their need. And it is our job to help people that are in need that we don't even know. And this is why Second Mile Mission Center in our church that was formed, Second Mile was formed out of our church as a food pantry and has grown into this great mission center, helping so many people in all this region, that we've got to continue being dedicated to Second Mile Missions, because it is our opportunity, one way in which we can touch the lives of people that need Christ and are in need physically, and through this need physically, we can introduce them to Jesus. It's important that we do this. This has been a part of Sugar Creek for these many decades, and it needs to continue to be a part of who we are, of helping meet the need of people in our area that are struggling financially. I'm understanding that 1 out of every 6 people in the world went to bed hungry last night. That's over 1 billion people. And though we cannot take care of 1 billion people at Sugar Creek, we launched a ministry out of this church called Living Water that now has become an international ministry in which we drill water wells in third world countries, and we've got to keep recommitting ourselves to that ministry of living water, because even though it's not food, and we're talking about food, it is water, and that's just as necessary as food. And it is our way of helping people in need that maybe we'll never meet, but God using us to care for others beyond ourselves. It's part of God's call to those who are Christ followers to help people in need. So here is Elijah. And Elijah says to this woman, would you get a hold of this? You've only got a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. You go and make some bread for me. I eat first. Then you and your son can eat afterwards. The nerve of the guy. And I look at this story and I read this story and I think to myself, who in their right mind would do this? This is a total stranger. She just met him. And I could see this woman saying, who do you think you are? I'm not going to feed you. I don't have enough stuff for my son and me. We're just going to eat this last food. And I don't know you, and I'm not going to give. You're a con artist, aren't you? The answer is no. I'm going to take care of my